I'm Nima Rajan. The UN COP26 summit has bid farewell to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, along with most of the 120 or so other world leaders who attended the climate conference over the past 2 days. But many nations' diplomats and negotiators will be sticking around the Glasgow, Scotland venue for the next 10 days. This in order to drill down on pledges their leaders announced. Some 25,000 people, including activists and charity workers, were expected to attend the COP gathering. David Cohen, a tech executive who once served as chief of staff to the mayor of Philadelphia, will be the next U.S. ambassador to Canada. Mr. Cohen is a lawyer who also served as a senior advisor and chief diversity officer at U.S. communications giant Comcast. He says he will be involved in discussions to, quote, make sure Canada's policies reflect its words in terms of the treatment of China. Canada has yet to formally say whether it plans to block Huawei equipment from being used in the country's expanding 5G network. All other Five Eyes intelligence partners have already done so. This includes the US, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia. Prospective homebuyers in Ontario's Greater Toronto area found dramatically fewer homes on the market last month compared to a year ago, which is pushing sales down and prices up. The Toronto Regional Real Estate Board interprets the numbers as a sign of tightening conditions in an already tight market. The board says 9,783 homes in the region changed hands last month. This is down nearly 7% from a record 10,503 in October last year. First Nations in BC have 30 days to decide whether they'll support the province's plan to temporarily defer the logging of old-growth trees. The province says the 2-year deferrals will be determined through agreements with First Nations and will provide time to develop new plans for managing old growth. The BC Council of Forest Industries says the deferrals could mean the loss of 18,000 jobs and more than $400 million in annual government revenues. The Surrey Board of Trade says 30 days is not enough time for First Nations to respond. The organization that represents 16 First Nations in central Alberta says it does not support the idea of the province replacing the RCMP with a provincial police force. The Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations says proper consultations have not been done with its members about the proposal. Last week, the province released the Alberta Provincial Police Service Transition Study. Grand Chief Greg Desjardins says if there is going to be a different police force, the Confederacy would like its own fully equipped force within Treaty 6 territory. An Alberta politician wants the RCMP to further investigate a weekend COVID-19 protest. Tracy Allard, a United Conservative backbencher, says the anti-mask protesters left a gallows and a noose outside her home in Grand Prairie on Sunday. She says that is inexcusable behavior and should not be considered normal. Ms. Allard says she has tried to find a middle ground in the debate over masks, health restrictions, vaccines, and personal freedoms during the COVID-19 crisis. Well, Manitoba will need plenty of snow this winter to ease the effects of the summer drought. The province's infrastructure minister, Ron Schuler, says without above-average snowfall, next spring and summer will be very troublesome for both farmers and communities. Ontario's Ministry of Transportation says more than 400,000 road tests have been cancelled due to the pandemic. The province has given novice drivers with licenses expiring between March 1st, 2020 and December 31st, 2022 until the end of next year to pass tests needed to maintain or upgrade their licenses. The Ministry of Transportation has opened 9 temporary road test centres but does not currently plan opening more. Opposition New Democrats have been calling on the Progressive Conservative government to open even more temporary drive test centres to deal with the backlog. Quebec Premier François Legault is confident that a $10 billion power export contract to Massachusetts will still come to pass. That's even after voters in Maine voted no yesterday to having a Hydro-Quebec power transmission line pass through the state. Mr. Legault said he knew the results of the referendum would be tight. He added that the governor of Massachusetts is determined to see the agreement through. Hydro-Quebec says the project would cut 3 million metric tons of GHG emissions per year. That is the equivalent of taking 700,000 cars off the road. Newfoundland and Labrador's Minister of Health says he doesn't yet have a clear idea of how long it would take to rebuild his province's health IT infrastructure. The province's main database and its backup system were damaged in a cyber attack detected Saturday. Eastern Health and Central Health say they expect to continue canceling thousands of non-emergency procedures today and tomorrow. We'll be right back. In the lead up to the recent federal vote, Elections Canada wanted to know how many Canadians believe some form of conspiracy theory. It commissioned a survey in April ahead of the 2021 election in September. The online study, recently posted to a government website, polled 2,000 Canadians, and it found 40% of respondents held what it calls mixed conspiracy beliefs. Among the questions asked was whether people believe that big global developments have been the result of a small group of people who secretly manipulate world events. The study looked into levels of public trust in institutions. Joining us now to talk more on this study is Mr. Matthew McKenna, a spokesperson from Elections Canada. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with what led Elections Canada to conduct this study in the first place.
So it's not uncommon. Elections Canada regularly conducts public opinion research, and it's a way for us to tap into how Canadians think and their perceptions about the electoral system. And it really helps to inform not only the services that we deliver, but how we talk about those services and how we communicate with Canadians. I mean, we have a mandate to deliver elections at any time, and that mandate includes being ready to make elections as accessible as possible, so people who want to vote are able to do so. And part of that has to do with, communicating with them in the right ways and really meeting Canadians where they're at in terms of the information that they need and how we communicate it to them.
All right, sir, let's dig into the survey now. What type of questions were included in the study here?
So the focus of the study was really to gauge Canadians' trust in not only our electoral system and the business that Elections Canada does, but in national institutions across the board. So it asked questions that gauge that level of trust. It looked at the ways that Canadians get information that informs that level of trust. And it explored areas, emerging issues that might have an impact on the level of trust that Canadians have in elections and in institutions across the board.
And the survey found 40% of respondents report believing in mixed conspiracy beliefs. So that's a significant number there, Mr. McKenna. What does all of this mean?
Well, mixed conspiracy beliefs, it's really the survey asked a number of questions to sort of develop a scale of where Canadians are at with respect to their perspectives on conspiracy. And that was really meant to help us gauge how those perspectives inform their level of trust in elections and in the way that we deliver elections. So, our interest was less in the specifics about the conspiracy questions and more in how where we did see that there was less trust in elections, whether or not there were sort of correlations between that and an overall level of distrust, or if it had more to do with the way that we deliver elections and things that we have a bit more control over.
All right, sir. So what are Elections Canada's main takeaways from this study?
Well, a couple of the biggies are that in general, the level of trust among Canadians in our federal elections is quite high. I think it was something around 87% of people believe that our elections are run fairly, and that Elections Canada specifically runs fair elections. And, there was, I think, 74% that had a high level of trust in elections overall in Canada. So, that's one big takeaway for us for sure, is that, despite, what we've seen maybe around the world and despite maybe what we hear in the news sometimes about, waning levels of trust, that in Canada, our systems are quite robust, and that shows in terms of what we saw in the findings here.
All right, sir, just about a minute left here, but you mentioned to me that this study was conducted to better understand how to adapt your work. So tell us a little bit more about how Elections Canada's operations are going to be improved moving forward.
Sure. I mean, it's still early days. We're still in the process of sort of, analyzing the findings and seeing how we can apply them to the work that we do. But I think one thing that we've learned over the years is that when it comes to communication and speaking to Canadians about, not only how things work, but how we deliver elections across the board, transparency is always key. The more that Canadians know about how we run our business and how elections run behind the scenes, the more they're able to sort of build that level of trust and get a better understanding of the nuts and bolts of things, so that there isn't, an information gap that can be filled with, either misinformation or perhaps, misguided ideas about how things work here. And when you compare the system in Canada to systems around the world, it is quite a bit different. So it's important for us to sort of fill those gaps and let Canadians know how things work.
All right. Well, stay tuned, everyone. We'll be right back after a short break on Forum Daily News. The Canadian Dairy Commission is recommending a large hike in farm gate milk prices. And that isn't the only price hike that Canadians are likely to see in their local grocery stores. The Federal Crown Corporation says an 8.4% price increase for processors is expected to be approved by provincial authorities next month. And it will take effect February 1st. Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, the director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University, says the retail price of milk in grocery stores could increase by as much as 10%. He says prices for dairy products like butter, cheese, and yogurt could rise as much as 15%. Dr. Charlebois joins us now to talk more on this. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
My pleasure.
Now, you're saying that there could be a 10 to 15% rise in dairy retail prices. What is behind this price increase, sir?
Well, according to the Canadian Dairy Commission, which is a Crown corporation, its job is to protect consumers by providing a fair price to farmers so we can keep some production capacity in the country. That's really what the CDC's role is. And they are justifying the hike by pointing at higher energy cost and higher feed prices as well. And but some numbers were provided. A report was posted, I believe it was on Monday. But again, details are cryptic. We don't have access to raw data. And we don't know if that data was verified by competent authorities or accountants. So it's always been that way for 53 years. So we've come accustomed to the CDC's modus operandi, but now with an 8.4% hike, which is a record, it's almost double the previous record. It got a lot of people concerned.
And we know the price hike for farm gate milk is set to take effect on February 1st. So when will consumers start seeing these price increases in stores?
Well, for fluid milk, almost immediately, basically, because you don't really require processing. As far as dairy products go, you may start seeing prices being adjusted probably in the middle of the winter, end of winter, early spring. For cheese, yogurt, and everything else we buy, you have to appreciate the fact that when it comes to dairy in Canada, the vast majority of dairy products are made in Canada because of supply management. There are high tariffs on import, and we have a quota system, which makes dairy very different than, say, beef, pork, or other products you would buy in a store. And so what happens with dairy prices, if dairy prices go up, it's like the tide. Dairy prices will go up. Eventually, other food items could go up as well. And so even if you don't eat dairy products, this will affect you.
So what other food products do you think will be affected following this, sir?
Well, let's face it, the 8.4% is not necessarily a shocker, at least for me. We were expecting a high percentage because across the grocery store, you're seeing prices going up right now, except perhaps for produce. Fruits and vegetables have been okay. We have a strong dollar to help us. But generally speaking, we are expecting higher prices in bakery, meat products, at the freezer counter or the freezer aisle as well. So those many sections of the grocery store will be impacted by inflation.
All right, sir, just a little over a minute left, but bringing this back home to our consumers watching this, how will these higher prices affect both consumers at home and the restaurant industry?
Oh my goodness. Well, what's unclear is how the industry will react, how processors will react. What has happened in the past is that when they felt that prices were too high, they actually illegally imported dairy proteins from the United States, a quarter of the price. That may happen again. And so prices may not be affected if they do that, but what could happen to the dairy industry is that we could actually reduce quotas and see many farms disappear. As far as restaurants go, I'm very concerned for them. Unless they do the same thing as processors and go south, their costs are going to go up significantly. Pizzerias is a good example. I mean, cheese is a huge part of their food costs, so they're going to have to either adjust their menu prices or reduce the quantity of cheese they put on their pizza or something else.
Well, I'm sure our consumers are not looking forward to that. Dr. Charlebois, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily News.
My pleasure.
All right, we'll be right back after the break with a look at stories from around the world and our weekly market update with Catherine Murray. So stay tuned on the Forum Daily News. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back. Up next is our weekly market update with Catherine Murray, the host of The Buck Stops Here. All yours, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima, and hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I am Catherine Murray. Markets are interesting these days, that is for sure, in the sense that the path of least resistance has been up and to the right. We saw the Dow, NASDAQ, as well as the S&P 500 hit new record highs yesterday, Tuesday's close. The TSX somewhat sideways trading and a bit of lack of direction right now. But of course, all eyes are on the U.S. Federal Reserve today, where it is widely expected that they will, in fact, announce the tapering of their bond buying program to the tune of $15 billion. It does seem somewhat expected, though, but the key will be what Fed Chair Jerome Powell says in his communication as relates to the inflation that we're seeing right now and what that might mean in terms of rate hikes. Keep in mind that many Wall Street and Bay Street strategists have already moved forward their rate hike expectations. But it will be very key to hear how he describes the current set of higher prices, whether or not that will be transitory. And what does transitory really mean? Before it was going to be 3, 5, 6 months, but now it seems as though it could be quite a bit longer. And if that's the case, what will the U.S. Federal Reserve have to do? Well, they have to start raising rates to combat the inflation that we're all seeing and feeling in our own personal pocketbook. So that will be absolutely key and critical. He's got to strike that right balance in terms of not spooking the markets, whereby people are going to think that the rates are going to increase very quickly, and therefore you'll see a sell-off in the equity market. So let's see how he does on that front. Again, it is somewhat expected that we will see that tapering pull back. And again, he's also got to communicate, Fed Chair Jerome Powell, that tapering is not tightening of the economy, that we will still have enough stimulus to keep this economic momentum going. So that is what we're going to be very much watching today. Of course, there's also a number of other key items this week. The U.S. non-farm payroll, so the jobs numbers are up this Friday as well. As it relates to what else is going on, stock-specific stories kind of interesting here. Air Canada, for one, did report a lower loss. The stock was up by about 4.4%. Revenues came in at $2 billion, higher than expectations of 1.8. So maybe we're on the way to the recovery. It's a slow recovery, but it certainly does seem to be happening when you take a look at some of the companies that we're watching. And energy was a little bit softer, but consensus is still that those stocks are going higher. And that does it for me. Nima, back to you.
Thanks for that, Catherine. More analysis and news on the markets with Catherine Murray on The Buck Stops Here. All right, the World Health Organization has granted an emergency use license to a coronavirus vaccine developed in India. In a statement on Wednesday, the UN Health Agency said it has authorized Covaxin, made by India's Bharat Biotech. The action makes Covaxin the 8th COVID-19 vaccine to receive WHO's green light. U.S. health officials have given the final sign-off to Pfizer's kid-size COVID-19 shot, marking a major expansion of the nation's vaccination campaign. The Food and Drug Administration had already authorized the shots for children ages 5 to 11, but the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention must recommend who should get FDA-cleared vaccines. The doses for kids are a third of the dose given to teens and adults. Republican former business executive Glenn Youngkin has won Virginia's closely watched governor's race. The rookie politician beat Democrat Terry McAuliffe, who served as governor from 2014 to 2018. Virginia was comfortably won by U.S. President Joe Biden a year ago. The Republican win is expected to alarm national Democrats about holding control of the Congress in next year's midterm elections. The UN Human Rights Chief says Ethiopia's year-long war in the Tigray region has been marked by extreme brutality. Michelle Bachelet says an investigation into the alleged atrocities shows the big numbers of violations are linked to Ethiopian forces and those from neighboring Eritrea. The investigation was hampered by intimidation and restrictions by authorities, and researchers didn't visit some of the worst affected locations. Africa's second most populous country is in a new state of emergency as rival Tigray forces threaten the capital. Facebook says it is facing the facts that it just can't continue to use its face recognition system. The social networking platform says it will delete the face prints of more than 1 billion people. The move comes amid growing concern about the use of facial recognition software and its potential misuse. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also watch all of our commentary programming and interviews on the News Forum YouTube channel. All right, thanks for joining us on Forum Daily News. Take care, Canada.